Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for waking up on a Saturday morning to come and listen to us. So, as was mentioned, I'm going to try and address what makes a good society and tell you a little bit about my very long life experience. So, how come when we talk about social change, when we talk about changing our society for the better, we are never idealistic enough to envision a time where we will have done such a great job that social change agents will no longer be relevant? If it's really about creating a good society, how come social change makers are not doing everything that they can to work themselves out of business? So to be clear, I'm not talking about a time where change will no longer be necessary. But in a world where changing the world has come to mean ending wars, genocides, famine, what has been termed the war on poverty, what I ask myself is, what does victory look like? Who are the winners? Who are the vanquished? And what is the role of the victims in all of this? And how can we ensure that the actual change-making process doesn't become the end? How do we ensure that it does not become a business more interested in sustaining itself rather than changing what it claims it wants to change? So these words is what I mean when I speak of the business, of the marketing of misery. On this you see AK-47, which is often pictured with a child soldier or a man holding it. You see helpless, you see invisible, you see Mandela, which I was once asked if he was the president of Africa. You see jungle, you see famine. These are the words that are recycled over and over again in the name of changing the world. So when I first came to the US, many of my first conversations went something like this. Hello, what's your name? Where are you from? My name is Stephanie, I'm from Rwanda. Wow, is that in Africa? How did you make it here? How did you hear of NYU or Swarthmore? And you must be so happy to be here. And another one, which is ironic in the wake of Trayvon Martin, you must feel so overwhelmed by all the liberties you find here. And recently, in the post-Hotel Rwanda phase, which I can tell you about Hotel Rwanda separately if you want, people often follow I'm from Rwanda with Rwanda, like Hotel Rwanda. Were you there? Was your family there? And I don't know about you, but to me, that's an incredibly inappropriate question for a stranger, to ask me whether my family is dead or alive, how much suffering I may or may not have gone through. So coming from Rwanda, where I had always been taught to be proud of who I am and where I'm from and what I can do to change my environment, it was a shock to hear people think and assume that I must be so grateful to be in America. Chimamanda Adichie said it best. For way too many of the people I continue to meet today, there was no possibility of feelings more complex than pity. And there is no possibility of a connection as human equals. So this picture is probably what many thought I would look like or the life I would lead if I had stayed in Africa. I'm not trying to generalize ignorance to this audience, just trying to point to the things and the images that have been associated with who I am. So this picture is from the 80s. But unfortunately, these are the images that continue to come back and characterize an entire continent over 20 years later. So when we talk of change makers, when pictures like these are used to appeal to emotions and of course our pockets, doesn't anyone wonder about this boy? Doesn't anyone wonder about his voice and his desires? Or do we add to the toll of what has already been taken away from him and take away his agency and his dignity? Do we just remove from consideration his right to self-dignity. Is the dehumanization of this boy on this picture, is it okay because it's for humanitarian purposes? One day, will he be sitting in a boardroom wishing this picture of him had not been immortalized by a public that failed to see his humanity? A public so blinded, it failed to notice when dignity became the trade currency of a very crowded market for compassion? Or is it a small price to pay when you're expected to be grateful for the lucrative nature of pity? How else do you expect to be fed, to be clothed, and to be cured from your tropical disease? So for most people, whether consciously or unconsciously, this image is what has been extended to all 54 continents, not to mention its citizens. It has become inescapable. It has become an entire continent's default identity. And from what I was encountering, it had seemed to become my default identity. During my first few years in the US, before I came to Swarthmore, I encountered many other questions, some funny, some not so funny, ranging from, have you ever been in a car or worn shoes, to a girl coming up to me and hugging me in sympathy and saying, I am so sorry for what happened to you. She had just read an article on female genital mutilation and assumed it happened to me too. So when I came to Swarthmore, I was relieved that I no longer had to answer the questions, do you have tigers in your backyard? Because everyone here knew there are no tigers in Africa. Most people could probably tell you which species lived where. Here, I found that the debate was no longer about pointing to another continent as the other. It was about finding solutions. The quest for social change was the norm here, and it went far beyond the Chalkings. It went far beyond Swarthmore. So as many of you know, I became part of I started my own quest for social change at Swarthmore, and I became part of the anti-genocide movement. And my role was to speak on Rwanda and relate it back to Darfur to raise awareness about the realities of what was happening. However, as time went by, the more rallies I attended, the more speeches I gave, the more disappointed looks from journalists looking for sensational stories, the more disappointed looks they gave me because no, I was not a genocide survivor, no, I had not lived in refugee camps, and no, America did not save my life. The more I realized that there was a problem with the way we were seeking change. There was a problem with this process. We had prided ourselves in raising awareness and telling stories of Darfurians. But wasn't that the equivalent of silencing them? We claimed that this was for their own good, that without our voices, theirs would not be heard. But why were we assuming that speaking for them was a charitable act and not one that was stripping them of their own agency and dignity? By casting ourselves as heroes of change, weren't we perpetuating the same image of a helpless continent that I was so against? Why weren't we asking for more? Why weren't we asking for our voices to become irrelevant so that their voices, their vision for their future, took over ours? I believe this is why. Whether politically or in popular culture or on college campuses, we had succeeded in turning a complex issue into one whose solution was external, but also simple enough to fit into a toolkit. As with many other causes, it was much easier to turn realities into sound bites, to appeal to the guilt of supporters through pictures of suffering, and through simplistic phrasing such as, it only takes $10, or it would only take 10 minutes of your life. I believe that this process is not leading us to the kind of social change we all believe in here. I believe you cannot speak of empowerment, of a better world, without speaking of the relationships we may be participating in maintaining. So we need to challenge the intellectual laziness that has come to characterize our approach to humanitarianism. So I'm not saying don't donate a meal to someone who's starving. What I am saying is, how can we design campaigns that change the system, or at least undermine the system, rather than sustain it? These pictures that we see and the lives that people are leading are not a result, did not come from a vacuum. They're a result of a man-made system, a system made by men and women like you and me, and maintained by men and women like you and me. So when we speak of empowerment, do we mean I empower you by speaking for you and telling you what change looks like? Do we question why some are stuck with their label of victim, while others inherit the role of saviors? Do we equate pity with caring? And has helping come to mean telling people what to do, how to do it, and when? So yes, do give where you can, but most importantly, question the relationships that have led to a unidirectional flow of resources. So the fact that the continent with the largest percentage of arable land is also the continent most known for its largest number of starving citizens should scream to us that there is a problem with the system. So instead of fighting the war on poverty, and this next set of words I have to say came from a friend of mine, so instead of fighting the war on poverty, why aren't we fighting the war on pathological power? Okay. So this is the image I want to leave you with. I want to believe that together we can conceive of a world where our perception of this picture is simply children who have the power to become who they want to become. I want to believe in a world where this picture, especially that one, is not recognized as some kind of exception, that the happiness on their faces is not the result of a donor's desire to change, to empower, and to save them. We all know that if there is one place to start challenging the status quo, it is here at Swarthmore with all of you. You must have the willingness to truly empower. To me, that means to transfer the power to change people's lives to the actual people whose lives you're trying to change. But you must ask yourself, are you willing to attain fluency in nuance? Are you willing to ask for more than compassion and pity? Are you willing to demand the kind of change that will make you, the change maker, the activist, less relevant? Are you willing to seek the kind of change that will make your business, your livelihood, obsolete? Are you willing to fight the war on pathological power, even if this means that you are giving up your power? The writer John Berger said once, "Never again will a single story be told as if it were the only one." Standing here amongst all of you, I can't help but share his hope.